One of the most important things in MOBAs like Deadlock is to try and never take a fight at a disadvantage. I see a lot of players in this game constantly trying to fight other players, constantly trying to get kills, and most of the time this just results in a game that is not just more difficult to win, but it can also outright turn the game around, turn those easy victories into a painful loss.
Why are you the fucking biggest bitches ever and you die to stupid shit afterwards? It's so fucking dumb.
Dude, I came to help you.
No,
You're the one getting caught out. Like, stop getting caught out. You suck, Holy fuck.
And I understand it, right? Fighting other players and trying to get as many kills as possible, that might be fun. But every fight that you take is also an opportunity or a chance for the opponent to get back in the game. You might roll over them at the start, kill them 2, 3 or 4 times. But if you keep fighting and they get you by the 5th, that can still result in a turnaround. It can allow them to get boss, get the rejuvenator, and suddenly that lead that you had now seems like a distant memory. All of this isn't to say that you should never fight, of course. It is a PvP game, and from the second that you drop into your lane, you're going to fight other players. But making sure that you only fight when you have the advantage in some way, shape or form is the best that you can do to try and minimize the risk associated with those fights. And in this video we're going to talk about that and what that looks like exactly, while also showing you some more concrete examples from some of my games. So first up, let's talk about why fighting in general, just fighting all the way from start to finish, just isn't really that favorable, even if you end up getting a slight kill lead because of it. And all that it really comes down to is that kills on players just don't give you as many souls as you'd think. A kill on a player at the start of the game gives you 250 souls, so that's a little bit less than just one wave of minions. And if your teammate is close enough to you, they'll get 125 as well for the assist. Now that's at the start of the game, and of course as the game continues, those values scale up over time. But so do the minions, and so do the neutral camps on the map. And the only reason that a player kill is that much more valuable as the game continues is because the respawn timer also increases as the game goes on, all the way to a maximum of 70 seconds, which then allows your team as a whole to do something with that kill. There's of course the argument to be made that early on in the game, if you manage to kill your opponent a few times, you'll deny them the chance to farm up as well. So even if you don't get rewarded for it as much, just being able to deny them the souls is also how you can establish a lead. And that is very true. I agree that a quick gank on a lane to just kill somebody fast can really swing the momentum one way or the other in that lane. So what I'm not saying is that you should just always avoid fights at all cost. By all means, if you're being pressured and the opponents are playing a bit too cocky, they're a bit too far out of position, punish them for it.
Man! Fucking Abrams. I don't know how that deflect didn't work. If you enjoy playing Abrams, yeah, unironically, you have no friends, I think.
But if you get to the point where you already have a little bit of a lead and you're actively seeking out fights, that is probably the worst way to play the game at that stage, and that is also the easiest way for your opponents to get back in the game. At the end of the day, if you have to go very far out of your way to get those kills because the opponents are playing safer and playing further back, then in the time that you could have gotten that one kill, you could have also taken probably a bunch of camps and maybe a bunch of waves, which would have gotten you much further ahead in most cases, without the risk of messing up and dying. Soul count is ultimately what determines your character's true strength. The one thing I always have in mind is that the fights will come sooner or later, whether I seek them out or not. And the best way that I can approach those fights and prepare for them is to be as strong as possible when they do happen. And the only guaranteed way to get stronger is to simply farm up. Okay. But now let's say that you're winning your lane, you have won your lane, and your teammates are winning their lane as well. And now you find yourself far ahead in the mid game with a fat 10 to 20k soul lead. In other words, your team is able to buy more items and they're objectively stronger than the opponents. Surely that would mean it is a good time to go for a fight then, to close out the game and not give the opponents a chance to really catch up. Well, yeah, but this is also where I see a lot of players end up going wrong. Because while fights that are going to happen are going to be more favorable for your team, that is only if they occur on even terms. And most of the time, if your team has a soul advantage and is actively seeking out those fights are not going to occur on even ground. Most of the time, if the team behind is playing a bit more passive and defensively, it still means that you're walking into a fight at a severe disadvantage, even if you have a large item lead. To further explain this, let's really look at what a 20k soul lead, for example, means. It means that if those souls are spread out evenly across your team, which isn't always the case, but let's assume that it is for now, that means that every single player can buy an extra 3k item over the opponents, an extra tier 3 item. Think of Leap on Pocket or Dynamo, think of Tesla bullets on Haze. Fairly large impact items, sure, but are those large enough to force fights in enemy territory? The answer is always that it depends, but I would say most of the time still no, and that is because of the way that the map in Deadlock is designed. It just naturally gives a couple of large advantages for the defenders that oftentimes outweigh even a 20k soul lead. The first of those advantages would be how much like in other MOBAs, the map has a bit of a convex shape to it as you get closer to each base. And that means that it gets really difficult to rotate from lane to lane right when you're in the middle of the map, but it makes it very quick to do so as you get closer to a base. That plus the transit lines that the defending players have access to can allow them to hop between the lanes with a lot more ease. It makes it far easier for the defending team to rotate and possibly take a fight at a man advantage. The second big advantage that the defenders also naturally get as you get closer to the enemy base is that it will get easier for them to hop in and out of fights, go to their base to heal up, and then get back in the fight with full health just 20 seconds later. So if you're playing on offense, if a fight is going on for a little while, every low health player that you aren't able to confirm the kill on is going to be back in the fight 20 or 30 seconds later with full health. And even if you do manage to confirm those kills, because of the fact that you're now so close to their base, when they respawn, those players will still be back into the fight instantly. There's a term in MOBAs that is called overstaying, and it means that you're just continuously fighting in enemy territory because it works for a while, but then you eventually end up dying because you simply cannot keep up with the sustain that the infinite base healing is providing. You then get wiped and the game turns on its head because the enemies can now go for boss and take back some of the map control. The last big disadvantage that you have if you're fighting in enemy territory is, well, the buildings themselves. The Guardians, the Walkers, they're not that dangerous if they're left unguarded, but when the opponents are playing defensively underneath them, these structures, they can be large difference makers. For one, you cannot really chase targets under those Walkers to confirm kills as easily, because, well, they will stun you and they will do a lot of damage. And that means that the opponents have an easier time getting away, going to base, healing up and getting back into the fight without you really getting any value. As long as the enemies burn the minion waves down, these structures also have some healing and a lot of damage resistance, so you cannot just burn them as a team either. And as the fight continues, these structures will also start dealing out a lot of damage. Maybe you're able to tank it for a little bit, but not the whole way through. On top of that, the walkers especially are also placed in locations that have a lot of vantage points. You can come in from the side, from above, even from below in some cases. So it's also really easy to get flanked while pushing these walkers, giving the opposing team yet another advantage that they can work with. Now, one argument that I've seen a lot of players make is that, well, if you just go to their walkers with 6 players, then surely you don't have to worry about rotation speeds because you're already 6 players there. Just run it down with 6 men and then you're just left with a building disadvantage.
Get him, chase. Go fruit, go.
Guys,
go,
they're
go,
gonna
fruit.
be up. You need to leave now. You need to leave now.
No, we are free. We killed a 7 here. Actually, we need to stop being such big pussies.
We stayed for 2 minutes. They pushed our lane and we died.
Yeah. Well, we need to stop being pussies. We won't win if you keep playing like this.
But the reason that this doesn't really work, or shouldn't work, assuming that both teams are of equal skill, is because it is far more difficult to push into 5 players as a 6-man team than that it is to push down a single lane uncontested by yourself, which would be the counterplay. If just 4 or 5 players defend your 6-man push and slow you down enough, and they have 1 or 2 players push down the other lanes on the opposite side of the map, you'll find that those 1 or 2 players are going to run down the map much faster than the 6-man team is on a single lane. This is what we usually refer to as split pushing, and it can be extremely effective against a team that is trying to meatball up as a 6-man as much as possible. So all of this means that if you're pushing into enemy territory, even with a lead, it doesn't mean that you will never be able to beat the odds. In some games, your team may just be that much better that you can get away with it. Maybe you're playing extremely well, or maybe the enemies are just playing very poorly. But as you start to play versus better and better players, you'll find that they will start punishing you for this. And this type of playstyle is simply not going to work. Playing so aggressive, always looking for picks in enemy territory is simply what we can call a very bad habit. And it just takes one team-wide misplay or just one good play by the opponents to turn the game on its head. Again, just a single pick can allow the opponents to go for boss, get Rejuvenator, and turn the game on its head entirely. And this is what I see happen in a lot of the games, even at the so-called top 0.1% of games that everybody is currently clickbaiting with. They are still very messy, and even in those games, players just try to go for fights all the time. But okay, now that we've talked about what not to do when you're ahead, and why fighting, even with a soul lead, can turn out to be very risky, let's look at some of the alternatives and take a good look on how you can close out these games properly. What should you be doing if it is not fighting? And the proper answer to that, I believe, is to simply take as much map control as you can by continuously shoving the waves, taking the souls, using the jungle, and running map objectives like the urn to further increase the gap in souls while slowly starving your opponents out of the game. And if that sounds strange to you because doing this will just give the opponents more space and now they have a chance to get back into the game slowly, just let me explain on why oftentimes this can work so well. So first up, if you already have a significant lead, let's say 10 or 20k souls ahead, that also must mean that the lead has to come from somewhere. So it is safe to assume that you have probably taken down a few of their buildings, let's say their guardians and maybe a walker in one of the lanes. And that would give you at least 1 or 2 flag slots. And you can use these flag slots to your advantage, because if you have those and your opponent doesn't, then that means that if the game would just go on and just be completely equal from here on out, then the team with the flag slots is going to win. Because the team without them, they can farm up in souls, but they will still not be able to buy as many items. And so at some point they will simply be capped, and they'll be forced to go for buildings if they want to scale up any further from here on out. And this is one way that you can force your opponents to take a disadvantageous fight. You're essentially putting them in the same position that you don't want to be in. You're going to be fighting on your side of the map. The only difference this time is that you now do not just have the defender's advantage, you also still have your item advantage. And that oftentimes just means that it becomes an impossible fight for the opponents to take. Starving the opponents out is the term that I use for this, and I play like this a lot. And I can confidently say that in my almost 500 hours of playtime now, I can count the times on my hand where this strategy didn't work out, assuming that the team was playing this out properly and wasn't getting picked off on the lanes left and right. So, to round this all up, the point I'm getting at is that you can look for fights in Deadlock throughout the game, and you can absolutely force them if you feel like you need to. But the number one rule that you should always try to follow is to never fight at a disadvantage. Everything else equal, that simply means that you should have a soul lead before jumping into a fight. But if that is not possible because you simply fell behind a bit too much in the early game, then you're going to have to either rely on the defender's advantage or try to get a pick through a numbers advantage. So don't go out there looking for picks deep into enemy territory even though you're ahead. If the goal is just to win harder and get further ahead, usually just farming your jungle or their jungle or the lanes is much more efficient when it comes to souls, and also doesn't have the added risk of dying and giving your opponents a chance to catch up with you. The main goal, team-wide, what you should be doing at all times is to keep as much map control as possible, and if you have a lead, try to use that map control to force your opponents into a bad fight that they're almost guaranteed to lose. And yeah, that was pretty much it. I hope this video helped you out at least a little bit. I hope you'll at least win a few more games because of it. And yes, I'll be back soon with another video because I want to get that Abrams guide out of the door. Thank you all so much for watching, and you will see me very soon.